Ladies and gentlemen, angry Americans around the country and around the world, I am thrilled and honored to have a very, very special guest joining us today, a man whose work I've admired for most of my life. You know him from your living room for the last couple of decades, and is, in my view, one of not just the best sports writers, but one of the best and most important writers in America. The great and powerful David Aldridge joins us, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Paul, thank you, man. That's quite an introduction. I really appreciate that, and thank you for what you've done and continue to do, man. For people who don't have a voice, you know, it means a lot to me that you're advocating and fighting for people that deserve our attention, and more than just thanks for your service. You know what I mean? So I appreciate what you do. I'm a pleasure to be on.
Thank you so much. Well, first off, every conversation we're having now is always with an important, inspiring, and iconic American. You check all three of those boxes, but it's also the new COVID-19 world. Yeah. So you're in D.C. You've been a great ambassador for D.C. and an advocate for D.C. Can you tell us, where are you? What's it like where you are? And if you can, give us some insight to life in D.C. right now.
Well, I live in the city. I've been in the city. I'm from here. Lived here my whole life. And it's tough right now. It's just tough just to see so many kind of iconic local businesses, especially, driving by and seeing that they're closed, and businesses that have been open my whole life here, in town. And it's sad. You think about the people that have operated those businesses, the people that depend on tips to make a living. You think about people who work in hotels that aren't getting more than minimum wage. You think about bartenders. I just think about the whole connectivity we have as a society, right? We kind of all take it for granted, I think. And you don't realize how many people you touch in the course of a given day or a given week. But, those connections are real and they're meaningful. And when they're severed, they have real consequences for people. So, it's sad. I'm sure it's sad, everywhere right now. I mean, I've got so many friends in New York, and they're all being touched by it, if not directly, certainly indirectly, whether it's a family member or a friend or somebody. So, it's hard in DC right now to see the streets empty. You see nobody walking. I mean, we understand that's what we need to do. We have to do it, but it doesn't make it any less sad to know that they had to, close the cherry blossoms off so that people couldn't go down there and watch them and congregate. So, all the zoos closed, all the things that we all kind of take for granted, is happening here. And you feel a sense of impotence almost that you're in what is supposedly the most powerful city in the world. And we have no powers. It's Oz. You know what I mean? Like we're all having to deal with the same things as everybody else.
Yeah, I think it was last year. I was in DC during the White House Correspondents' Dinner. I always feel like DC and the Hill is such a contrast, right?
Oh, sure.
And, I went out into Franklin Park and I interviewed homeless people, like 2 blocks away from Trump's hotel.
Right.
Right. And that contrast seems like a constant part of existence in DC, life in DC. And DC is in the shadow of the Capitol and often seems forgotten by the Capitol. So we've seen the mayor and so many other people advocating for the district in ways that are powerful. I mean, we haven't really gotten into this in the show, but we talk a lot about independence. How do you feel about DC statehood? I mean, you grew up there, you went to school at American, right, in DC. Sure. How do you feel about DC statehood?
Oh, man, look, if you've grown up in the city and you understand what disenfranchising is all about, and it's been my entire life here, paying federal taxes and having no representation in Congress, we're the only municipality in the country that does that, and you mentioned it. Well, I mean, there's official DC, there's the political DC. If you're from the city, you don't have any real contact with that world. Right. That's a different world. That's not a world that I'm used to. I'm not a part of it. I don't necessarily want to be a part of it. I grew up in the city with, my father was a mailman. My mother was a nurse, so I have a special affinity for the nurses and doctors that are fighting this fight every day. So it's 2 cities, and again, the fact that we were not treated like all the other states were with regard to to the first bailout bill. It just speaks to the continual kind of systematic disenfranchisement that we've had to suffer through my whole lifetime. And before my lifetime, they didn't even have a non-voting representative in Congress. Right. At least we have that now. So it's always a problem. And you hope that, I've always said, Paul, you don't want to make DC a state, that's fine with me, but then I shouldn't have to pay taxes. You know what I mean? Like one or the other, it's fine with me if you don't want to make us a state for whatever political reasons you have, but then eliminate the federal income tax for people that live in the city.
Yeah. I think that's a reasonable argument. Isn't the license plate say taxation without representation?
Right. Exactly.
Right? On the DC license plate, anybody who's been down
exactly.
there. Well, I see you've been broadcast. You're a broadcast expert, a veteran in the space. I see you're in what looks like an addict away from your family. But I want to ask you, as I do everybody, when you are taking a break from DC or taking a break from sports, what is your adult beverage of choice, David?
Oh, it's a Bacardi and Coke. That's
really?
My dad's drink. That was my dad's drink. It's my drink. Following in my father's footsteps. That's my go-to. So, some sort of, can't be Barbadian rum, because I did that once when I was a young man, and that didn't turn out too well. So I just stick with the Bacardi and a Coke right now. That's kind of what I roll with.
That's a great choice. Usually when we did these in person, we could share the drink together. So we'll have to put a peg in that and do it.
Absolutely.
Once all this passes.
Sure.
But you are such a great voice on not just sports, but American culture.
Mm-hmm.
And the intersection of economics and race and entertainment, so many other components. I really was eager to have this conversation with you because we've never seen a sports environment like this. I don't think ever, right? I mean, even during world wars, sports shut down temporarily, but parts continued and they recovered. Can you kind of set the stage in your view? How big of a moment is this in the history of sports? And maybe a very big question, what do you think sports looks like now in the future? Mm-hmm. Everything's different. The NBA is shut down. They're talking about reopening. I want to go deeper into that. Mm-hmm. But on a very macro scale, frame up this moment and your thoughts, if you would, please.
Well, look, I certainly feel like, sports has kind of a unique place in the culture. It's kind of the escape, right? It's what people want to do when they don't want to think about coronavirus or 9/11 or whatever calamity has hit our country in a given point in time. You could always kind of fall back on, well, at least they're still playing baseball, or at least they're still playing football, and I can watch a game and forget about it for 3 hours. So that's no longer available to people. And, sports is the unique thing about sports certainly is, you go to a concert, right? It's whoever's there at the concert, right? It's 18,000 people sharing that experience together, but it's just those 18,000 people, right? So the difference with sports, of course, is that you have both the people in the arena, and then you have, factors of 20, 30, 40, 50 times more people watching it on TV. So there's a communal experience that really cuts across most, not all, but most racial, economic lines. You can always talk to somebody about sports, and the fact that you're denied being able to have that experience with other people, whether watching it on TV and talking about it on Twitter, which is what a lot of people do now, or going to a game and sharing that experience with fellow fans. It's so difficult, I think, for people to accept. And I understand that. But I'm, it concerns me that I think people want the sports back because they want to have that sense of normalcy, but man, it's going to be very difficult, I think, Paul, to restart, especially the team sports. I think you could probably start the PGA Tour, right? You could probably do that with no fans. You could, it's a player and it's the player's caddy, essentially, right? That's it. They don't have an entourage. There's not coaches, so you could probably do that one. You might be able to do tennis. Tennis has more people involved, but you could potentially get tennis back online. But when you talk about baseball, basketball, football, especially with, 53 in the pros and, 80 in college, I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you start that back up with the close contact, the physicality that people have in those sports. It's going to be very difficult. I just did a piece for The Athletic this week about the Japanese B League, which is a pro basketball league in Japan.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about that piece especially.
Yeah, they stopped in the middle.
Really insightful, right?
Yeah,
the NBA, you know, is shut down now, right? And we're now like maybe more than any other sport, we're like the clock is running out, right?
Right.
Looks like
That's
NBA is going to be gone, right? Maybe they'll salvage it, but I actually wanted to ask you about that piece specifically because I thought it was so powerful, and you can go deeper, but you describe, you know, the B League where they reopened for a bit and then had to reclose.
Right.
You can also, what they call the biosphere concept.
Yeah, right.
Can you talk about that as well, please?
Yeah. Well, we'll start with the B League. You know, it's a 36 teams in 2 divisions, and they have a semi-pro 3rd division, but it's mainly the 36 teams, 18 in each league. And they tried to restart. You know, they stopped in February when the pandemic was starting to really take off, unfortunately, in China especially. It didn't really, there's lots of different theories about why it didn't really take off in Japan as quickly as it did in other places, but it didn't. And so they tried to come back in mid-March, and they played exactly 1 weekend, 2 games, and they had to shut it down again because you had one team that had eight players and coaches come down with COVID. You had a referee get sick. You had three American players refuse to play because they didn't want to be susceptible to it. And so it was just a lot of chaos, you know, and so they had to shut down again. And so the reason why I wrote that is because they had good intentions. There was no villain, you know, they wanted to play again. They wanted fans to have an outlet again. They didn't play in front of any fans. All the games were empty arenas. They tried to do everything to keep the ball sanitized and everything else that they could. And it still couldn't keep it out. You know, it's a virus, man. I mean, what are you going to do? So, and it's a very contagious one. So, you know, the problem for the NBA and for any league is, how do you justify one death? How do you do that? Like,
right. Yep.
I mean, what I've been saying to people, Paul, and you're very familiar, I'm sure, with the John Kerry quote. How do you ask a man to be the last person to die for a mistake? Right. Right.
So here you're asking, how do you be the first guy to die?
Right. Right. So, you know, I mean, how do you, whatever league it is, if somebody gets sick and dies because you started playing again, what is that? You know, where do you go from there? You know, I mean, that's so that's the problem, I think, for any league. In terms of what the NBA is trying to do, they want to have, as you mentioned, this biosphere concept where they bring every team to one city, and they're talking about Vegas. You know, okay, maybe you could do it. You got enough hotel space. You could keep everybody kind of isolated from one another, and they would try to keep travel absolutely limited. They'd have everybody quarantined for 2 weeks prior. They'd get tested. Obviously, if they were positive, they couldn't come, but if they're negative, they could come, and they would get tested every day while they were there. And, you know, it sounds theoretically possible, and certainly both the league and the players have a financial incentive to continue playing. But I don't know, man. I just think it's going to be difficult. And as you mentioned, at some point, you just run out of days. You know, I mean, you just don't have – they want to try and start next season on time in October. And so you have to finish in August at the absolute latest to give them some time off. So it's going to be a tight window, very tight window.
So the way it would work is they'd basically turn all of Vegas into a biosphere, right?
Yeah.
And the Nets would have, you know, the Hard Rock Cafe, and the Thunder would have the Sands or whatever.
Right, exactly.
And they'd all be in this contained bubble, and they would never leave. Right,
that's the idea. Yeah,
demented sci-fi film of the future.
Right.
And you gotta hope that a bunch of 22-year-old millionaires follow the rules, right?
Yeah.
They have a hard time doing in Manhattan or anywhere else. Nobody in, nobody out. But and it would also I guess theoretically it would regenerate some of the economy in Vegas as well.
Right.
But I guess
you'd have no fans. That's the problem.
Yeah.
There's no fans.
They want to broadcast it, right? And
Right.
So I guess I want to take this a step further with you if I can, David, right?
Yeah.
So how far can the leagues go before they theoretically go bankrupt or start to lose so much money that they have to do something, right? If you think of an airlines going bankrupt, I had Tom Colicchio on. He says as many as 70% of restaurants could be gone after this. I mean, the XFL has imploded now, right? Even faster than most folks predicted. Mm-hmm. But at what point does it reach a crossroads where, a league, and maybe it's not the NBA, maybe it's a league that's more precarious financially, says, okay, players, you got to play or you don't get paid.
Right.
And then we have maybe the ultimate union dispute, like players versus owners dispute we've ever had, right? Because the players are going to run out of money at some point, and unless the league keeps paying them. And at some point that becomes financially, unsustainable. So projections are that this could go on for 18 months. Where do you see that going? And are there leagues that are particularly vulnerable in your view?
Well, I think about college basketball because they depend so much on March Madness, right? They depend so much on the tournament to generate the revenue. I think it's something like 70% of their revenue comes from the tournament. And that revenue in turn is used by the individual colleges to kind of fund their sports, right? And so we've already seen, I think it was University of Cincinnati is going to have to eliminate some sports because they're not going to get the revenue that they expected this year. And so that could potentially be a problem. The difference with the pro sports leagues, I think at the very least is they're unionized, right? And so in the case of the NBA, the union has already agreed with the NBA on a certain amount of salary reduction. If the season's canceled, the players will give the owners a certain amount of that money back to kind of not make them whole, but at least ease the pinch, so that they should be okay for this year. And presumably they would do this as long as the pandemic is in effect and games aren't being played. And also the pro leagues have lines of credit that they can access, billion-dollar lines of credit, so that they have a little bit more cushion than a smaller league, certainly a startup league like the XFL that, didn't have that kind of financial cushion. They had nothing to fall back on. But the big four of, baseball, basketball, hockey, football, I think should be okay going forward, at least for the next year, I would think.
So that's a good pivot into the NFL. So this week is the virtual NFL draft, right?
Right.
Which is going to be surreal. They're going to essentially do it online, but there have been even concerns about letting film crews into the living rooms of players that are going to get signed for that big moment when, Bubro or Tua or someone else, finds out when that phone call comes. Now it's going to be, I guess, on Skype, right? I've been to the draft. I've been to the draft, and it's one of the most exciting, I think, moments, not just in sports, but in America.
Yeah.
You see these families and these kids that have worked so hard that entire life, in that moment where you can see their socioeconomic future change immediately. Right. And for generations of their family, if they don't screw it up, right? It's that hard work, all that. It's really the American dream, like manifest, right? And especially the sports American dream. But the NFL draft is going to happen. I mean, they may be drafting for a season that never comes. So what are your thoughts on that? And I can't have, the great David Aldridge on without asking you to talk about Brady and now Gronk going to Tampa Bay.
Yeah.
As Governor Ron DeSantis, is pushing to reopen the states. I mean, if it was a team that was going to come online quickly, it'd probably be Tampa.
Right.
Maybe you see teams relocating to South Dakota.
Right.
But can you break down your thoughts on the draft and all the chaos that's happening in the league right now?
Right. Well, I mean, the NFL, is kind of the number one sport, right? It's the colossus, I think, in terms of team sports in the States, certainly. I think short term they'll be okay. The draft, the only thing that's really affected is that first round where you see the guys go up on the stage and they get the hug from Goodell and all that. And that's a great moment. Don't get me wrong. It's a terrific moment. But after the first round, everybody's at home anyway, right? So, I mean, that's usually how it works. So they should be okay. The question as you brought up was, what happens to the season? When can they start the season? They've already missed a lot of the off-season work that they would be doing, that they would have done already, and that they would do in the next 6 weeks with their draft picks that they bring online this weekend. So it's going to be difficult, man. I mean, I've covered enough football and I know enough football players to know that the only way you get good at playing football is playing football. There's no substitute for it, and there's no substitute for the hitting and the physicality of it. And so it's going to be very difficult, and you wonder about injuries. I certainly will whenever they come back. Now, I think they probably will. My guess is you'll see a very limited preseason schedule, but you have to have at least 1 or 2 practice games after all this time off. What happens with Tampa? I mean, Brady's no kid, and he's going to need to. He can't. You don't want him to get rusty. He's got to learn a new system anyway. At least he's got Gronk to throw to. So and they got a smart coach down there in Bruce Arians who knows what he's doing. So they could probably figure out ways to mitigate that, but it's still going to be a challenge for them. It would be a challenge with no problems, but certainly with this, it's going to be a major challenge for them.
David, you got great contacts across all the leagues, right? You're a guy that's trusted, that's respected. I think for folks that don't know, it was interesting to see your journey starting out at the Washington Post, and transitioning, hard into sports, and now making the leap to the Athletic, which is really kind of at the forward edge of where media is going. But you're talking to players all the time. You had Barkley on your podcast, which was fantastic, and I love your podcast and I love the conversations you have. But it's clear you have a trust with the players. Can you talk about that trust and an insight into what that's like as a journalist? We've had a lot of different kinds of journalists on this show at a time where the president is calling journalists enemy of the state. Right? I mean, that includes Marines like James Laporta we had on, and theoretically it includes you, right?
Yeah, right.
But talk about your lessons learned in how to develop those relationships and what you're hearing now. Like, what are players thinking and concerned about and talking about in this time?
Well, I think the trust thing is just it. I hope that it's a matter of the fact of the function of me over the years. I never try to pretend I know more than I know, and I never try to pretend that I'm someone I'm not, and I never played football at a high level, so I have no idea what it's like to be an offensive tackle, so I ask them, you know what I mean? So I try not to pretend that I know more than I know, and if I don't know, I tell you, hey, I don't understand this, explain this to me, right? So, and I think they appreciate that because you're talking about their jobs and their livelihood, and they want people to get it right. And you had the courtesy of asking them, and so I always feel like if you're fair to people, they'll be fair to you. If you try to be a wise guy and a smart ass and try to, kill people in print or on TV, that doesn't last, man. I mean, that has a shelf life, because people remember things, and they're human beings. And I never wanted to make it about me, and, there's not, most people in my business don't, but there's a few, who want to call attention to themselves, and I don't, it's just not who I am. But there's a lot of people like me, Paul. There's a lot of reporters that just want to get it right. That's the motivation for 99% of the people that do this for a living. We just want to get it right. But sometimes we have to ask tough questions, and that's the job, and if you don't want to do that, then this isn't the job for you, so you got to do it.
And what's the chatter? I mean, I hate to consider athletes a monolith, right?
Yeah.
But what do you feel? Where do you feel like players are at right now? I mean, is everybody, watching and waiting? I mean, nobody wants to be the guinea pig, right? Nobody wants to be the first league to go.
Yeah.
But there comes a point where they got to stop, shooting Instagram videos in their backyard, right?
Sure.
But where do you feel like the leadership is? And obviously the most notable players like a LeBron or a Brady, it seems like they're going to have an outsized influence.
Yeah.
You mentioned the NBA. I think that's important because their union is so strong.
Yeah.
But what do you hear, and who do you look to be the leaders for all of sports in a time like this?
Right. Well, look, I think these are, as you know, the most competitive people that you could put together, right? I mean, it's amazingly hyper-competitive people. They want to play. Look, guys want to play. They want to compete. They want a chance to win a championship. Whether you haven't started the season yet, like baseball and football, or you're in the middle of your season, like basketball and hockey, where, you want to, the whole point of this is to find out who wins, right? So, I mean, they want to find out who wins. So, but they are responsible in understanding that it's not going to be something that's simple to do. And so I think you have, whether it's baseball, baseball was talking about doing something similar, bringing everybody out to Arizona.
Right.
And, some guys were immediately like, hey, that sounds like a good idea. And other guys were like, I'm not so sure, for a bunch of different reasons. So I think they are pretty reflective of our society at large. I think most people understand that if if the best way to kind of flatten the curve is to stay home, then stay home. But there's some that are kind of restless and want to get back out. And certainly most of them want to resume playing as soon as possible and as safely as possible. But I think these are guys that don't mind risk. I think they understand risk, physical risk, certainly. And so after a while, I think you're going to see more guys say, hey, we understand that this is a gamble, but I'm willing to take that gamble because I want to keep playing.
Yeah, in some ways, it kind of feels like the national anthem moment.
Yeah.
Right? Where it was like, who is going to step forward? And you probably couldn't have predicted who was going to be vocal, who was going to be silent.
Right.
But in this show, we've really covered the intersection of sports and politics, which I think is impossible to decouple, right?
Yeah.
We've had some media places recently which have said, like ESPN and others have said, we're only doing sports, we're not doing politics. I don't know where you draw that line anymore, right? Now, especially now, because the leagues are going to be dependent upon policymakers. With Dana White's trying to pull together UFC fights, and he's exploring every location under the sun. Yeah. And it could be that a governor or a county executive or a reservation leadership says, okay, you can do it here.
Yeah.
But do you see any leaders or voices emerging that you think are kind of built for this?
I think if, on the basketball piece, that's my area of expertise. So I would stick with that, for now, at least. I think, LeBron certainly is a guy that I would look to kind of provide some leadership. Chris Paul's another guy, who certainly is the president of the Players Union, a very vocal guy. You've got some guys on the executive committee like Andre Iguodala and CJ McCollum. And there's some really thoughtful, smart guys that I think will take a lead on this, because I think the players in the NBA, certainly much more so than in the NFL, the players really kind of run the show. I mean, it's their league. And so what they want to do is what's going to happen. And so my suspicion is that, they've been talking to the league this whole time about how to do this. So I think they'll come up with something. I think they'll come up with something that's palatable enough for the majority of players that they can get it through and get a season finished. Now, whether that's going to be going straight to the playoffs, having all 30 teams, having just the playoff teams, that I don't know. That's going to be a logistics question as much as anything else. Can you do this, right? Can you do this safely? And then we obviously are all kind of running on the parallel track of testing, and when they come up, do they come up with a vaccine anytime in the next year, or is it going to be 18 months? Is it going to be 2 years? So, but I think I think in the summer it's different because people can just go outside, at least theoretically, and do something to enjoy themselves. But I think when you get back to the fall, it's going to be hard not to play. It's going to be hard. Yeah. As this fall comes and then leading into winter, if we're still not playing, it's going to be awfully difficult to keep leagues from figuring out something to do.
Your story, I think, is inspiring and part of why I wanted to talk to you. But I don't want to have you on the show and not take you in the way back machine.
Yeah.
Ask you a question I ask of all our guests, whether it was in D.C. or somewhere else. David, what was your first car?
My first car was a Chevy Chevette, a blue Chevy Chevette that my mother had, and she gave it to me essentially. And I drove that around college while I was in college, and for the first several years when I was out of college. Didn't have much of anything, but it got me where I needed to go, Paul. That was the important thing.
What year was it, and what color was it, David?
I think it was I want to say it was like an 81 Chevette, and it was blue. It was light blue. And it was tiny, but
like a North Carolina blue, like a baby blue, or what kind of?
It wasn't powder blue. It was more like and it wasn't a dark blue. I'm trying to think what would be a good blue. Like the Thunder's road uniforms. It was like that. Like that kind of blue.
I knew there'd be a sports color weeks and records, right? Especially at a time where it's been, one of my criticisms early on was, as it seemed like I still believe there are two groups of people. There are a group of people that believe we're at a nation and a world at war against the virus. And there are a group of people who don't, right? 97% of the country right now is shut down. 3% is not.
Yeah.
But in the early stages of this, I felt like there was a bit of tone deafness in the sports world, especially because it was signing time and free agent time. And Brady, I was criticizing Brady quite a bit because he's signing his big contract in his mansion. I was in New York City with sirens outside my door, running into hospitals. So I feel like there's, thankfully that shifted a little bit now. The league's going to focus on COVID-19 during the draft, but I hope that there'll be this rush of energy from the players to really, use their voices to make an impact. But there's also some anger on the flip side. Some of these people who are protesting in places like Michigan and others saying, I want my sports. That's why we need to reopen. So there's anger and frustration, I think, happening on all sides, but you're a very thoughtful guy. So I want to ask you another question I ask of all our guests. David Aldridge, what makes you angry?
Hypocrisy. Hypocrisy makes me angry. I don't mind there being rules as long as we all follow them, so bullying of any kind, whether it's physical or emotional or economic, I just detest that. I'm a big believer in, we all are on this planet, right? And so to get the most out of this planet, we all got to kind of figure out how to do this together, right? So, and again, I'm fine if you say everybody stops at a red light, but everybody's got to stop at the red light if that's the rule, right? So, you know what I mean? So that's what really angers me, is that I think there's a lot of do as I say, not as I do in this country right now. And it's troubling because I think it continues to divide us unnecessarily. And I think we could do so much more if we work together than if we continue with this tribalism that we're doing now, where we're not ever pulling in the same direction on anything. I mean, this country, we've seen what this country can do when we're all pulling in the same direction. We can do some pretty impressive stuff. We have an incredible work ethic, and we have an incredible ability to produce things that matter in people's lives if we're all on the same page. And we haven't been on the same page for a while. I'd like us to get back to it if we could.
I appreciate that. And I think you've been a leader who's led by example. I know a lot of folks consider you a role model and appreciate the integrity and the way you've approached your craft and your life. But you're also kind of touching on something that I wanted to get into, which is we've never had in my lifetime a president who's so aggressively attacked sports figures, even manipulated, right? I mean, the national anthem is just one piece, but now it's become an issue of, shut up and dribble, or, are they going to come to the White House after a championship or not? As much as you're comfortable, your thoughts on the president and the climate he's creating and his leadership or their lack of in this time.
Well, it's unfortunate. I'm not a fan of Donald Trump. Let's be blunt about it. I don't think he is a serious person, and he's in a serious job, unfortunately. And it's and I don't have any animosity towards him if he wants to be a rich guy living a rich guy's life. Okay, that's you're right. But when you involve other people who didn't ask to be involved, that's when I have a problem with it. And so, we can be a great nation or we can be a small, petty nation. And I just think we're better than this. I just think we're a better country than this. It doesn't, when I say that, I'm not ignoring the history of this country. I understand, I'm a black guy. I understand the history of this country. Okay. I understand the racial history of this country. But I also understand that there were times, rare though they may be, there were times where we moved forward. We said, look, let's try to do this a little better than we've been doing it, and we could get back to that if we had people who wanted to get back to that. And I think appealing to people's kind of base instincts is not a way to govern. You don't govern by, attacking other people. I just don't think that's the way you govern. It doesn't move us forward in any direction. I may have disagreed with George Bush or Ronald Reagan about a great many policies, but at least they had some, this is just the presidency by tweet. I mean, that's not how you forget inspiring people. It's just basic leadership, if ever there was a moment where everybody would put their politics aside and say, lead us. We're scared. People are scared. People are dying. Lead us and tell us what to do and we'll do it, but tell us intelligently, tell us with facts what we should be doing. I think people would do that in this particular climate, and to see it be the same kind of, for a president to say I'm not responsible for anything, what? What is that? That's a complete abdication of leadership. So I don't know. I'm just, I was hoping for better, but I expected the worst, and we're getting what I expected.
Maybe in stark contrast, as we have this conversation, one of the things that many Americans are sharing is this ESPN series, The Last Dance.
Yeah.
Right? And it's really fascinating and fantastic. For the folks that don't know, 2 episodes were dropped this past Sunday, and I think they're going to drop 2 every week for 5 weeks, right?
5 weeks, right.
And really, it's so far, like the documentary series, I want to sit down my son at some point to explain to him the Michael Jordan that I saw, right? And the Bulls that I saw. But it's a real insight into Michael Jordan and into that time and into America. That's what makes it so big, right?
Yeah.
And then there's a cameo by a certain person, in contrast to Trump, of course, President Barack Obama, who is labeled as Chicago resident, right?
Former Chicago resident, right?
Former Chicago president, says Chicago resident is his chyron, which is genius.
Yeah.
But this seems like a moment, right? Like we aren't sharing a whole lot of things. I had Jeffrey Wright on the show.
Right.
Westworld has become a moment we're all sharing now, right?
Right.
Food with Tom Colicchio I had on. We're talking about food as membership, but The Last Dance is really good.
Yeah, it is.
But can you talk a little bit about that and your thoughts on it now?
Yeah, no, I'm just glad that people under, let's say, 35, whom probably, even if they remember Jordan, they were kids. They didn't really understand it, even if they saw him. I think that I'm glad they're getting to see kind of the totality of the guy, and whether you like him or not. And you don't have to like him. I understand that. He can be abrasive and off-putting to a lot of people. But if you want to understand why he was the way he was, I think this show shows it to you. It's just, he's just wired differently than other people. It's just, I've never seen in 30 years a guy as competitive as that guy was. And it permeated every fiber of his being, every moment he was awake. And you can decry that, but that's who he was, and that's why he was so driven, and that's why he was so maniacal in terms of winning. He wasn't running for, father of the year or, teammate of the year or anything like that. He was trying to win championships. And in that time, Paul, that's what a lot of people did. He was no different than Bird or Magic or Isaiah Thomas. They were all lunatics, and they all were tough on their teammates. They all, yelled at their teammates when they weren't doing what they thought they should be doing. So you had to be that way back then. Maybe you don't have to be that way now, but back then with the rules, the way they were then, you had to be that way. So I'm glad people are getting to see this. And it's, I remember Kevin McHale, after Jordan retired the last time, I remember Kevin McHale saying to me, in 15 years, they're going to forget about Michael Jordan. And I said, you're nuts, man. They're never going to forget about Michael Jordan. And he was right. He was right. Out of sight, out of mind. And so I'm glad that people who didn't get to see him play, and now you got to remember now, this is a generation now. He came back and played in Washington, but that was kind of not really, what people remember. He retired 22 years ago. So, that's a generation, So there's a lot of people that never saw him play and don't know what the fuss was all about. And I'm glad they're getting to see it.
Yeah, you're great in it. I don't know if you're in it a lot in the episodes to come, but I think it was maybe Costas or someone says, there was Babe Ruth, there's Muhammad Ali, and Michael Jordan. Just in terms of his impact we could argue greatest player of all time.
Right.
My uneducated view, I think he is.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, less arguably the most important player of all time, right? In terms of how he shaped the world on the global stage with the Olympics,
right,
and the corporate components and his cultural influence, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where his magnitude is really now being fully appreciated. But do you have a story? You covered him, you met him, you were around him, you're in the doc, and any Michael Jordan story that you want to share that you feel like is one folks need to know?
Well, I mean, the story I always tell Paul is that when I was covering the Bullets, they were the Bullets then before they became the Wizards, I was the beat writer. And the Bullets played a back-to-back 2 games in 2 nights with the Bulls. The first game was in Chicago. Then everybody got on a plane, flew back to D.C. They played the next night in D.C. So the first night in Chicago, the Bullets had a guard at the time named LeBradford Smith, who was a first-round pick, decent player, not great, but a decent player. And LeBradford Smith had the game of his life. He just had the game of his life. He scored 37 points, not all of them against Jordan, but a lot of them against Jordan. And the Chicago still won the game, but the story was, hey, this kid scored 37 points on Michael Jordan, right? And after the game, I was there, so I'm not guessing. LeBradford Smith was very complimentary. He was like, hey, it was just I was lucky. Michael Jordan's still the best, blah, blah, blah. So the next night, they're in Washington, same 2 teams, and Jordan scores 36 points against LeBradford Smith in the first half of the game.
Wow.
36 and a half. And the story that comes out of this afterwards is that Michael Jordan claims that LeBradford Smith was dismissive of him the first night and kind of patted him on the butt and said, hey, nice game, Mike, and walked off the court. And he was angry, and that fueled him to this performance the next night. The problem is the story's complete bullshit. He made it up. He completely made up this story about LeBradford Smith just to have something to motivate him the next night to go out there and destroy this guy. And that's Michael Jordan. That's who he was. Like, it didn't matter. Whatever slight, real or imagined, he would put into this blast furnace and just stoke himself into a rage that he would use to play against whoever it was he was playing that night. And that's who he was, man.
Wow. I think it's such an interesting time for this conversation to be happening, because it's an exploration of leadership, and you get to see, Phil as a coach, and you get to see Jerry Krause as a GM, and you get to see Jordan as a player and Pippen as a player,
right,
and all these other, folks in this amazingly colorful cast. I mean, even for younger folks to be able to see Rodman as a serious player, right?
Right.
A guy who's flying to North Korea and doing crazy shit.
Yeah.
What a 6-7 time, all NBA guy and a defensive, force.
Yeah.
But taking another step back, maybe something else that's happening in this time.
Mm-hmm.
This week is the 16th anniversary of the death of Pat Tillman.
Yeah.
And I've obviously covered veterans issues, national defense, security, war. And I felt like that was really an important time, David, because it was the first time people felt like they lost someone they knew.
Mm-hmm.
Because so few people actually had somebody serving in the military. It's less than 1/2%. But when Pat Tillman died, people felt like they knew Pat Tillman.
Yeah.
Right? Now, every sports fan knew the story. Even people who weren't sports fans respected this guy.
Yeah.
And I felt like in some ways it was a tipping point in terms of the public support, because they felt a real sense of loss.
Mm-hmm.
A talented guy who didn't have to do it was gone. So I'm always very reflective about the Pat Tillman moment, not just a celebration of who he was, but then also finding out that there was a cover-up in the way he was killed.
Right.
In a very important way, it's kind of a double-edged sword, showing and revealing that time in America, how it was, the glory and the tragedy of post 9/11 all at once. But now it's been 16 years, I think. Do you have any thoughts or reflections on Pat Tillman and that time period?
Oh, no, there's no question. I mean, Paul, we were, both adults then and remember very vividly how the NFL used Pat Tillman. Right. I mean, that's the only way I could put it, is that they used him. They used him in death to kind of promote this agenda that they wanted to put forward And as you pointed out, subsequently we found out that, Pat Tillman was very much anti-war and certainly anti that war, and it makes you kind of think a certain way about symbolism. And it takes away from the real heroism of that young man, to walk away from a very lucrative career to serve his country because he felt like he needed to do that. And the reasons he felt like he needed to do that were not the reasons we were told, So it was a very abject listen to me and understanding the power of propaganda and how you have to really be kind of a alert citizen to when you're being manipulated. And I always felt bad for his family because, they were kind of brought into this maelstrom that they weren't asked to. And it always bothers me when you do that to people. They're still grieving. They don't even have a time to grieve properly, And so it always troubled me. After 9/11, I did a piece about a guy that was in the Pentagon that died that day and was a former college football player, a running back. And I can't tell you just how moved and impressed I was with everybody connected with that, from his friends to his widow to the officers that were there with him that day. And it's just, there are a lot of people who sacrifice, as you know, and the sacrifice should be enough, and to ask them to be something else in death is where I really have I really take issue with. And so I certainly remember Pat Tillman's death, and I certainly remember the controversy about it. And, again, even though I was in my 30s then, it was a good lesson for me to learn.
Mm-hmm. And the NFL has learned a lot of lessons the hard way, I think, over time in the last couple of years. And anytime folks want to argue that you have to separate politics and sports,
you can't.
The NFL is the ultimate example. A lot of folks don't know about one of John McCain's last efforts when he was in the Senate was an investigation into how the Department of Defense was paying NFL teams to do these fancy welcome home ceremonies where the soldier would run out into the field. And the NFL, more than anybody else, in my view, has wrapped themselves in the American flag and gotten the power of the American brand at a discount. Right. And that's never been more true than around Pat Tillman. I actually had a meeting with Goodell. I guess it was last year, a year and a half ago, at the crest of the Kaepernick controversy.
Right.
I was leading IAVA, and they had we had done a survey of veterans to ask them how they felt about this. And the number one takeaway was that they didn't really think it was that important, and they thought that other things were more important. But then they were divided. There were some folks who say, I'm boycotting the NFL. There were others who said, I'm going to support folks in their power to kneel. But I was interested in meeting Goodell and seeing that they didn't really have a plan for Trump. And they've consistently seemed to kind of struggle with the politics in the face of the magnitude of it, right? I told Goodell, I said, you're getting your ass kicked. I said, Trump's kicking the shit out of you, and he has a plan, and you don't. His plan is to just keep knocking you around, and your plan is to just, reel. You're on defense, and he's driving this conversation. So I think that the plan of the NFL basically was to keep their head down, put Kaepernick in the penalty box, and wait for it to blow over. And that seems to have been the case. But I think, the NFL is still something that brings me tremendous happiness, support.
Sure, I get it. Yeah.
Sports brings us so much happiness, and I think we're all looking at that now. But you're a guy who brings a lot of positivity to everything you do. I want to bring positivity on this show anytime I can. But your insights on another question I ask everyone, David Aldridge, what makes you happy?
Well, I think what it's a good question. I mean, what makes me happy at this stage of my life is it's not a cliche, my family and my friends. They really do. I have, had a great life. I've met a lot of people, and it's been wonderful to kind of live this life that I've led. But as you get older, as you know, you start losing people, right? You start losing friends and family members, and you hold tighter to the ones that you still have. And I know that's been the case with me over the last, 10 years or so. I mean, it seems like every day someone I know is losing a parent or losing a brother or a sister. I lost my brother last year, and it's, it's tough, man. It's tough. And So I have found that the company of friends and being with people, whether it's here in DC or out of town, is something that really makes me happy. Just knowing people who really do know me, and I enjoy that. I enjoy being able to kind of relax and enjoy that time with them, because we're not here very long, man. So you got to enjoy those moments when you can. It's one of the reasons why I took the job with the Athletic, is because I just wanted to be around my family more. It was time. The boys we have 2 sons, and they're getting up there. They're both teenagers now, and that means they're not going to be here much longer. So I wanted to make sure that I was more present, and so that's what brings me joy right now more than anything.
Thank you. I've got 2 boys. They're much younger. They're 4 and 1, but close in the I think one of the hardest parts of this Corona normal is parenting.
Yeah.
It's whether your kids are teenagers, grown, or toddlers. You're a guy that a lot of folks feel like is kind of a father figure in their life. If you grew up watching sports, and look up to you. Do you have any advice as a parent, or lessons learned now that you're a bit wiser and older?
I would say, number 1, your significant other is always right. That's a good lesson. whatever they say. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. That helps out a lot. Just be you, man. I mean, you're a good guy, you're a good man, and they will see that over the course of their lifetimes. And so if you're consistent in your values and what you try to teach your children, I think just being present is so important to them. Just them knowing you're there, whether they say anything to you or not. Again, teenage boys are in that kind of grunting stage where they don't really communicate verbally anymore, but that's okay. I think it's them knowing that I'm here more often than I'm not now, I think makes a difference. And so just being present in their lives, whatever it is they're doing, whatever their extracurricular activities are, if you can get to as many of them as you can, man, that goes a long way.
Amazing. Well, I am extremely grateful, most of all, for your example. Everybody I have on this show, I talk about a lot, are leaders in different industries and different spaces, but folks that anybody can connect with or understand their journey. And I respect your journey so much and the way you've done it. I went back and read the letter you wrote, or the piece you wrote when you talked about going to the Athletic and talking about being connected to your family.
Yeah.
I can see anybody who's been around sports, you can tell who the players really respect, and the coaches and the administrators and everybody else, and everybody who talks to you has a reverence for you and a respect for you because of the way you do things and the kind of person you are. So I want to thank you for that. And I want to thank you for your consistent voice. I mean, you're really a fantastic writer. You've taught me to be a better writer, reading you and watching your coverage. So I appreciate that very much. And this is the point of show where we're normally in person do a giving of the gifts. So I'm going to do the virtual giving of the gift,
okay,
if you don't mind. So first, we've got some Angry Americans gear that I'll send.
Oh, dude. Oh, that's awesome.
Okay.
Oh, thank you so much.
I'll send you blue and red. Since
that's great.
You can have both, but made in America by the veterans of Oscar Mike.
Oh,
we don't have jerseys yet, but we might have to work on
it. I'll take the T-shirts. It's fine.
Some quarantine men's products for you.
There you go. Okay.
They also have antibacterial wipes in case you can't shower or you shit boobs or something. Or your boys might need a.
They shower occasionally, right now.
Yeah. And then I've been trying. It's tougher to pick a whiskey. Usually I go into a whiskey store, but I got some Bakers.
Wow!
That is
stuff,
American
man.
made.
Thank you.
That I thought, it's 7 years minimum, but you're a guy who's kind of 7 days a week. You've been bringing great integrity and inspiration and impact and information.
Paul,
so
this is very nice.
I'll get this to you somehow.
I appreciate all of that, man.
And
seriously.
then there's one last piece. I ran out of my stash of Peeps. The
yeah.
But this is the last question I've been asking everybody. There are 3 colors of Peeps: yellow, pink, and blue. David, which color would you pick and why?
Yellow, those pink, 3 blue. Colors, I'm probably going to go blue. I'm probably going to go blue Peeps. I don't look good in yellow, and I don't know, pink, not for me.
Do you have a favorite? What's your favorite sport yourself? Like, you're such a sport lover. Do you have a favorite sport you like yourself, or you like to play or do?
Well, I was, my sport was always, I kind of petered out at softball. That was kind of level I played at, Paul. Look, there's something to love in all the different sports for different reasons, but I certainly, because of my familiarity with basketball, I would say basketball, because even after 30 years of covering it on a fairly close basis, I still almost always see something amazing every night. Somebody does something incredible. And so it's the individuality within structure that I just find fascinating. You have the individual talents of whoever it is, LeBron or Steph Curry or whoever's on the court, but they have to play with 4 other guys for the thing to work. Otherwise it's just a solo act, And so the fact that you have that great individual talent in a team structure when it works well, that's what I love about the game. I really do love about it. It's a great lesson for everybody.
I share that with you. I mean, and now that I'm at the point where I play old man basketball, and half my goal is just trying not to get hurt.
Exactly.
I'm a guy who sets a lot of picks. So
there you go.
That's tough. Try to not to get hurt and set picks at the same time.
No, but it's actually easier to set picks. Yeah, right. Less chance of getting hurt.
Yeah. But also, as I've taught my sons now how to play, it's the improvisation of basketball, the creativity,
yes.
Maybe more than almost any other sport. And you see, the old guys on the court. Now I'm one of the old guys.
Yeah.
But that creativity is part of what just makes it fun.
Yeah.
There's a fun to basketball that I don't know if any other sport really has.
Well, it's got the scoring. I think people like scoring, and the back and forth, and possessions are quick. So it's a game for the 21st century for sure.
Well, you are a man for the 21st century. You are a great leader, a great American, a great role model. I am very, very thankful for your friendship and for your time and for joining us. I encourage everybody to read everything you write on The Athletic, to check out your podcast, follow you on Twitter. But my deepest thanks to you, especially during this time, for joining us, David.
Paul, it's my pleasure. I really appreciate you asking me to be on. I'm a big fan of yours, man, and the work you're doing. And I always feel inadequate around people that really do work with those men and women that sacrifice so much for the rest of us. And it's such a small percentage, as you know, and they don't have anybody. They have very few people, I should say, advocating for them. And you do that. And I really respect what you do.
Well, thank you, my friend. I hope we can get together soon and drink some whiskey in a really a really nice empty basketball arena. Maybe like me and you could do a game of horse at Madison Square Garden. You might know a guy. we could hook it up and do it.
I might know somebody. That would be fun.
All right. David Aldridge, the great and powerful David Aldridge, thank you so much for joining us on Angry Americans. Thank you, my friend.
Thanks, Paul.